Okay, so we have two more arguments left to go, and then we will be done. Now, hopefully you put the diagram and the pattern over here as directed if you're using this form printed. Now we're going to use this space to do the reformatting and employment of uniform language. So of course here, premise 1 is statement 1. So we're going to do premise 1. Start way over here and write really small because these sentences are really long. The statements are really long, compared to some of the other ones, at least in the last argument. So here we have if, so it says this class includes attention to intellectual virtue, then remember what I said about the words if and then in conditional statements and not taking them out. That is not to be done. That is not what is meant. That has nothing to do with eliminating excess verbiage. You destroy this if you do that. The conditional, then this is a class that will help me learn to communicate in a way that reflects rational virtues. Okay. Just so happens that the other premise in this argument is second in the ordinary version, and so it just so happens that this is premise 2. Remember, the premise numbers aren't necessarily going to be the same number in the paragraph. You have to remember that. Remember, what's being numbered in the paragraph are the statements. This is statement 1. This does not say premise 1. This is statement 1. This is statement 2. This is not premise 2. This is statement 3, but this is not conclusion 3. I don't know why, but sometimes at the end of the semester, students stop numbering the statement that is the conclusion in the paragraph. They'll just give me something like this. But remember, we're numbering statements. It's not till we get down here that we're numbering premises. And in this case, remember, we see that the ordering of the premises and hence the statement numbers happens to just be such that the list has the same premise number as the statement numbers. Here it was different, right? Here you had statement 3 was premise 1. And then you had this conclusion. Sometimes students will also start with the number here. So they'll say, I don't know, they'll just do some weird things. Just make sure you follow the rules and the conventions I've given you. So then statement 2 happens to be premise 2. And it says, I have already learned about intellectual virtue during weeks 3 and 4 of this course. Okay. And then it just so happens that our last statement in the reformat, it just so happens that it's the last statement in the ordinary version of the argument. I will learn to communicate in, so here it says in such a way. What do they mean? What is meant by in such a way? We have to go back up to look for the clues. So this says, if this class includes attention to intellectual virtues, then, so this is talking about to communicate in such a way. Where up here, before the conclusion, does the speaker or writer talk about communication? it's going to be in this part right here, okay, of the conditional, the then part. This is a class that will help me learn to what? Communicate. How? In a way that reflects rational virtues. What does this say? Communicate in such a way. So what we need to do is we need to replace such a way with, not in such a way, but in a way that reflects rational values. So here in this argument, we ended up employing uniform language. In this particular version, we didn't, but in this version, we did, and only once. So in such a way. That said, why don't we go ahead and do another example? Now remember, what these examples, the words might or likely, the words likely will need to be replaced with something else, but everything's always context, right? So like whether an example applies or rules applies, it's always context dependent. So you have to look at the argument as a whole, what the other statements are saying and whatnot. But some other words that you might see that might indicate you need to replace a phrase with other phrases or words that you might need to replace with something more specific include things like another phrase in doing so. This is back to page 4 of your notes. In such a way. Not always. So just because you see this phrase doesn't mean it needs to be replaced. You have to look at the context of that phrase, the context of the sentence, the context of these words, meaning the sentence they're in, but also the context of the sentence or the statement, meaning the broader argument of which it is a part of. So in doing so, in such a way. All right, so now we have one more argument. Let's go ahead and start. P1. If I make philosophy applicable to real life, you will see the value that philosophy has to offer. Okay. Premise 2, if you see the value it has to offer, okay, then you will be more engaged with the discipline. Okay, conclusion. If I make philosophy relevant to the real world, you will be more into the course. Okay, so now remember I said you should, of course, never take out if because you destroy the conditional. You might create a sentence fragment and definitely comma splices. You don't take out the word then, but remember I also said in a previous video that while you should not take out the words if or then, you can, when you recognize that you're getting a version of a conditional, add the word what? Then. You can never add a word if. Okay, if you don't see the word if, you don't have a conditional, and you can't turn a non-conditional into a conditional. So here, if you wanted to, you could do this, which I would recommend. Then, and then here, you could also insert the word then. If you were typing this out, you would just insert that, right? The space bar and then type. Now, have I missed any opportunities to employ uniform language? I hope you said yes, all right? So let's look at premise 2. What does it say? If you see the value of it, okay, what does it refer to in premise 1? This says we're looking for a clue. Where in premise 1 or where else in the argument does it talk about value? Here it says in the then part of conditional statement 1, right, the value that philosophy has to offer. So you would say if you see the value philosophy. So you would need to, what I want you to do before submitting this is to take out the word if. If you want to, you can just totally cross it out, mark it out, erase it. And then if you need to, you can draw a little arrow upwards and write the word philosophy, okay? Employing uniform language. What does it refer to? Making the logic from here to here, the chain of reasoning, super explicit. Then you will be more engaged with the discipline. If we replace it with philosophy, we don't have to say philosophy here for the discipline because we already have the word philosophy in the same sentence, in the same statement. We had to replace it at this point because in this statement, it has no reference to philosophy, but that's what it's talking about. And it makes sense to replace it in the first instance where it is vague what the word is referring to, and that would be it. Like that, we already clarify what we're talking about, the subject. We make it more explicit at the beginning of the conditional statement. What about down here? If I make philosophy relevant to the real world, then you will be more into the course. Okay, so here it says relevant to the real world. Did I say something similar to this phrase up here? Yes. If I make philosophy applicable to the real life, here I say the same thing in different words, relevant to the real world. Okay, so here you could replace either. So either you need to erase or totally cross out this part, relevant to the real world, and replace it with applicable to real life, or you can totally erase or totally mark out applicable to real life and replace it, and replace it with relevant to the real world. But you can definitely apply uniform language here. You need to make a decision about which phrase you want to replace with the other phrase. So do that before you submit your notes. And then we've got, then you will be more into the course, okay? More into the course means you'll be more engaged in it, you'll be more into it. Okay, so do I say something like that? Yes. Look at premise 2. More engaged, more into with the discipline, philosophy, the course, which is here. So what's more specific? Engaged with the discipline or more into the course? They're about the same. If I look back up here, it's talking about, keep talking about philosophy. So you could replace either, okay? You could replace either. So you could say more engaged with the course, or you could say more into, because where do you have philosophy here? I would be fine with either. I can see reasons for replacing course with discipline or discipline with course. But of course, you want your other phrase to be, you'd have to replace the entire phrase. So either you're going to say, so you can up to more. So you'd either have to replace engaged with the discipline with into the course. Actually, no, now that I'm thinking about it, engaged sounds more like an exact word for trying to figure out, trying to point to the psychology, right? The psychology of experiencing philosophy, which is part of the claim. So saying more into is kind of more slangish, it's more general. So it'd be better, and I want you to then keep this part, right? And then replace into the course with engaged with the discipline. And that concludes this series of videos and our lessons on clarifying arguments using only simple arguments as our examples.